live broadcast. It's the first of two videos today because the second one will be the normal Friday upload, and that normal one is about the German arms manufacturing location DAG Bromberg, which will be at 2000 hours. As always on a Friday, 2000 hours Central European time. Today, as this is a live broadcast always, for those of you who are making comments, please keep the language appropriate. So, today I'm going to talk about annexations, which is somewhat appropriate because at this very moment there is a ceremony in Moscow to celebrate the annexation after a somewhat fraudulent referendum, or four fraudulent referenda in the occupied parts of Ukraine. Now, in the olden days, it was seen that there was a war. Good morning. Hello, Michael. There was a war. When the war was won, the borders changed. Hello, Isa. And the borders changed. And normally what that meant was that the hello, Annie. The borders changed, granting certain territories to the winning power. That is, for example, how Britain got a hold of Gibraltar in 1703, at the same time getting hold of Ibiza, but it lost Ibiza in the Napoleonic Wars, but not Gibraltar. So the borders changed, and it had very little to do with the wishes of the population. Now, after the end of the First World War, borders changed quite dramatically. This were sort of the great empires which had built up from, say, even the 17th century onwards. Sorry, there's a mosquito on my hand. There you go, there's my hand. I'll show it to you. If I remember, I'll show you my hand at the end, because I think you've got me. And the swelling comes up after about 20 minutes. So yeah, I should be safe if I'm mosquitoes up here. So there were major changes. So, for example, Poland, the country I'm in right now, in Wrocław, and yeah, they are everywhere, yes, which have been divided up between Russia, Austria, and Germany in 3 land grabs by those countries, and Prussia, which then became part of all of Prussia, then became part of Germany as the inheritance state. And as a result of these land grabs, Poland ceased to exist, but then it came back to life again. One country that benefited from the First World War was Denmark. In 1863, Prussia and Austria had, at 1863-64, Prussia and Austria attacked Denmark. Denmark lost a huge amount of its territory in the south. At the end of the First World War, it regained around half of the territory it lost. These weren't annexations, though. These were the results of peace conferences which sought to divide up Europe and make it a bit fair. I mean, one could of course say that the dividing up of the colonial possessions of the European powers was an annexation, because the wishes of the population had absolutely nothing to do with this. So, for example, German colonies in Africa and Asia, not that there were many in Asia, but there were 1 or 2, Samoa, for example, were divided up amongst the victorious powers. We saw in the 1930s a similar sort of pattern developed in the first war, I think, of note, where there were, which was based on the principle of annexing land, was the Bolivian attack on Paraguay, a conflict which became known as the Chaco War. And the objective of that, as far as Bolivia was concerned, or the rulers of Bolivia, was to find an access to the sea via the Plata River. So if you look at Bolivia on a map, Bolivia in the 19th century lost its access to the Pacific Ocean in a war with Chile. And I believe until relatively recently, Bolivian telephone books still showed the border of Bolivia with the bit that Chile took in the 19th century, I believe. Sorry, I haven't seen one, I'm just been told that. So anyway, Bolivia thought they could attack a far weaker Paraguay, get a bit of its land, and then get access to the sea via the Plata River, and that was a failure. But that was the first attempt, and the border was drawn in a way as to sort of more benefit Paraguay at the time. Now Hitler, who was already in power, and he sought to change the borders in Europe. And initially there was some logic to what Hitler was doing. After all, for example, when he marched German troops into the Rhineland, the point of doing this was just to put troops in Germany. It wasn't. What was wrong with that? The unification with Austria, annexation of Austria, which happened in 1938. Again, you could say, well, these people are German speakers, and so what is wrong with that? Well, of course, the population of Austria had never historically been part of Germany. Never once, not once in history. And the fact that they were German speakers. And now, according to Gestapo reports on the opinion polls, it was believed that something like 30% was in favour, 70% was against it. Of course, they did arrange a referendum, and the referendum results, surprise, surprise, showed 99% in favour of union with Nazi Germany. And that was after the Nazis had occupied some 6-7 weeks earlier. And that is precisely the sort of thing we can see today happening in Ukraine. Seeing his great success there, Hitler went on to the annexation of land in Czechoslovakia, and what happened there, very similar situation, claiming that these were German people who were living there. Yes, that's true, they were German speakers. You can go to these border areas, former border areas, or still are, but it's bordering now with Poland, of course, and you can see in the graveyards, in fact I've got videos of them, everything's written in German, it's not written in Czech. So, or the people who died before 1945, for example, and you can see all things found by the roads, and even occasionally houses and things, it's written in German, not in Czech. So there was the claim that the German population of Czechoslovakia was being maltreated by the Czech rulers, and therefore the Nazis had to come in and rescue these Germans. Of course, it didn't mean rescue for most of them, because this also produced a flood of refugees, of whom the bulk were German speakers. And not only that, it didn't actually stop Hitler at all by giving him all this land, because he occupied Bohemia and Moravia within a few months, 6 months later. So that excuse of they were coming in to rescue Germans then could not really be applied, but I think there were still people gullible enough to believe it. In March of 1939, Nazi Germany effectively invaded Lithuania. This is something which many history books ignore. It was the last peaceful annexation. Lithuania, tiny country, which had with Nazi Germany, obviously didn't have particularly good relations, and certainly didn't with Poland either, its other neighbour. And Nazi Germany occupied Klaipeda memo, which probably did have a not probably, sorry, certainly did have a German-speaking majority. Again, once more, using the same excuse, is to unite Germans in one country. Now, the thing is, though, it's never asked is, did these Germans want to be united? And given the choice, for example, of living in a democratic Czechoslovakia, where there were certain rights, and living in Nazi Germany, where not only was the standard of living possibly lower for the average person, but also with no rights, then it's hard to believe that irrespective of one's natural first language, mother tongue, why one would want to live in Nazi Germany. And the same thing is quite clear in Ukraine now, that when I'm in Ukraine, I use the Russian language. I can't speak Ukrainian, but it's utterly clear to me that next to nobody wants to have anything to do with the neo-Nazi regime in the Kremlin. So now this effectively, Lithuania was the last country that land was annexed to in peacetime. Nazi Germany then turned on Poland and occupied the country together with its ally in the Kremlin. The two, Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, attacked this country 1st and the 17th of September 1939. They occupied it together, and the Soviet Union then held some consultations with the people who lived there, who obviously requested coming into the Soviet Union, becoming part of the Soviet Union, and Stalin graciously granted their request. As far as the West, sorry, this happened yesterday as well, I know. Oh dear, what's happened here? Sorry. Yesterday, I thought this problem wasn't going to happen again. My gimbal, I've got a new, yes, the gimbal. I bought a protection for the camera, and clearly it's too heavy for the gimbal. And so it's a surrounding thing. Now, I think I can't get it off. This is still the old gimbal. I got another one actually turned up yesterday, so I'll be using that. I just hope the new one can take this weight. I wouldn't have thought it added much to it, but obviously if the telephone falls on the ground, as it did do 2 years ago, I was filming the ghetto near Łódź, in a village near Łódź, and I was then altered the position of the telephone, and it fell on the ground, and it was €300 of repairs to the telephone. Anyway, that apart, in Nazi Germany occupying the western parts, directly annexed parts of Poland to it, and stayed in occupation of a large part in the centre. The parts it occupied obviously did include parts which had been German before the First World War, but also they added others to it. And to ensure that this was a sort of German homeland, to create a German majority, it started kicking people out who didn't meet their racial criteria, and started importing people in from German speakers from the Soviet Union. I'll have to do a video on that sometime in the future. Now, the thing with this is the annexations, though, continued after the Second World War, with massive. Poland lost half of its territory to the Soviet Union. Okay, it was then compensated, being theoretically a victorious power, by a large slice of Germany. And for example, here where I am right now, this was Germany until May 1945. So but the annexations at the end of World War II I think in many cases the idea was that this was going to be the end of the annexations. So the idea was after the end of the war that there would be no more annexations. For example, after the end of the thank you. After the end of the Iraq war, I mean, there was talk of Turkey somehow reclaiming parts of Kurdish territory of Iraq, but this was deemed as being unacceptable. Now, one thing that I always thought of in the breakup of the Soviet Union is that the borders that were created by the Soviet Union were unacceptable. Now, if in the last few days there have been border clashes between Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and this is largely being caused by the really odd. The border of Tajikistan, for somebody like myself who's interested in borders, is really odd and curious. One of the things with annexations and border changes, which happened at the end of the First World War, is that they took into account the population, but what they also had to take into account was things like the economic viability. So, for example, if I take things like railway lines, Poland got a railway line in the far north of the country, so it would continue through Polish territory, and near oh, the name's gone. So the south of Iława is Lubawa, sorry, that's the place, Lubawa, which had a largely German-speaking population, but it got it because it was a line which then went into Polish territory again. And in the south, in Szczecin, Czechoslovakia got Szczecin, which had a largely, well, Szczecin had a German-speaking population, but the area around it was overwhelmingly Polish in the countryside, but it went to Czechoslovakia because there was only two potential long main intercity railway lines between the two countries. Anyway, so this brings me on to what's happened now, and is it tenable in the long term? I would have to say that, in my opinion, what we can see today is not absolutely tenable in a long term. If you large amounts of Ukrainians which have been forced to live in Russia, which now I can only say from my own experience, there's nothing other than utter hate towards the unfortunately, it's not just against the Putin regime, it's against all Russians. And so these people may be absorbed by force, but how long that would mean huge Russian security apparatus to actually keep it there. So on the other hand, I think this is the annexations that we see now, the first in Europe effectively since the end of the Second World War. There are places, for example, if Albania could have theoretically annexed those parts of Yugoslavia which had a Albanian majority, and I see, I've just got the message that Ukraine's just filed for quick NATO membership. Do you think it's going to get it? Sorry, I just finished the point about Albania. Well, it would have made sense, those places in Albania, in Yugoslavia, which had Albanian majority, to have actually gone to Albania, had there been, but it wasn't done. Now, one of the things that the Putin regime has constantly said is that NATO is trying to get Ukraine to become a member. In the first place, even if Russia wanted to become a member, it could do. Indeed, in around 2001, Putin said to the head of NATO, whose name I've forgotten, somebody will remember, that what if Russia wanted to join? And it was explained to him then that the way it worked was that NATO didn't send out invitations. You had to make an application. And, as it is everywhere, well, sometimes with jobs you get people sort of asking if you want to join the company, but normally you have to apply. If you want to join the golf club or something, the golf club doesn't apply to you, you apply to the golf club. So Lord Robert, I've forgotten his name, he's from Scotland, I've forgotten completely, whatever his name is. Anyway, it'll come back to me before long. It'll come back to me when I stop doing this. Anyway, so it was explained that you have to fulfill certain criteria. Now, to answer the question, if Ukraine does have the right to make an application to join, and the thing is, border disputes cannot be grandfathered into NATO. If you have a dispute with a country up front, you cannot bring that into NATO with you and expect that NATO will then give you protection. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there are some minor disputes amongst NATO members, one between Canada and Denmark over an island, but I don't think that's going to end up in any form of violence. There are, for example, disputes between Britain and Spain over Gibraltar, but once more, I don't think that was serious enough to warrant Spain being refused entry to NATO in 1985, I think it was. There was even a referendum on Spanish participation in NATO. I was a student in Madrid at the time. Now, to answer the question, do I think that Ukraine will be granted NATO access? The answer to that question is no, I don't. The reason I don't think it, because it's got territorial disputes. Unless it resolves these disputes with Russia, it can't just join. So as things stand at the moment, Ukraine, first of all, it needs to have peace. You cannot be in a war and then grandfather your war in to join NATO. That's the point number one. And point number two is, so let's supposing it would have to agree to the occupation of the annexation of Crimea and these 4 other oblasts into Russia. Now, another problem with the annexation is the following. Dmitry Peskov himself, when talking about Mariupol, said that Mariupol is part of the Donetsk oblast. Therefore, this was before it was captured. Therefore, it should be part of Russia. So therefore, it stands to reason that those parts of the oblasts of Kherson and Zaporizhia and Lugansk, which are now either been liberated or were never occupied by Russia, then that they were also part of its claims. So unless, the only way I can see this happening is that there's a peace agreement now that Ukraine agrees to handing over all these territories to Russia, and then Ukraine would be free to join NATO. That could be the what the Putin regime sees as its way out of this war. That could be what it's trying for. I suspect. I just thought that one now, actually, but I suspect that might be its aim. And okay, right, so anyway, so there's a little bit of a chat from here as I walk along this dike once more, the same dike as I've walked along for the past few days. I'm staying in a place called Shechnitsa, which is behind me. There you go, it's down there. And walking along the dike, and the Oder River, as you may have seen in other videos, is over there. And yesterday I did a video a month ago on the poisoning of the Oder River, and we yesterday there were 3 reports released as to what caused it, and it's agreed now it's something called golden algae, but where this golden algae comes from is not agreed upon. And I'll just quote Greenpeace's version, which they say it's from salted water being dumped into the river by Polish coal mines. Polish government reports suggested that it was from natural reasons, and the German government report said that it was from man-made reasons, but it declined to actually mention what it was. So that's where we stand as far as the poisoning of the Oder River is concerned. That killed between 1.5 and 2 million fish, and potentially a major ecological disaster. Right, so thanks very much for watching. So I think I'll finish for today on this one. This evening there is a video on the... Oops, it's gone again. It's off again. Okay, I'm just going to hold it in my hand. Is of a video. Thanks. Thank you. And thanks for the hearing my perspective comment. And so tonight a video on the don't tell Russia they'll blame the Americans. Actually, you know, this is a really important thing. Actually, this is blaming the Americans is what this is all about, and the propaganda which is being put out on the Russian television is to blame the United States. And this, I was even talking to somebody, and he was, "Oh, we don't want this war. Ukrainians don't want this war. It's the Americans." You know, and this is, people believe it. There are people who really believe it was the United States that invaded Ukraine, and the Russians are there to protect them from these evil Americans. Anyway, I'll do a video on that some other time. Thanks for being here with me today, and all the best from me in Szczecnica, Poland. Thank you.